Hello, welcome to DevForce. I'm Ward Bell, VP of Technology at IdeaBlade, and your host for this short video introduction to DevForce in WPF. Our goal is to take you from file new to a working DevForce application in the shortest time possible. The emphasis is on fast. We're not looking for pretty. We're not looking for the right way, at least not yet. But you know, if I'd never used DevForce before, the first thing I'd want to know is, does it work and is it easy? And we can find out in 4 basic steps. We'll start from file new with the amazingly simple DevForce WPF application template. Almost nothing to it. Then we'll model your database with the entity framework. We'll flesh out the main page view with a data grid to hold customers. And then we'll tell DevForce to retrieve customers and pour them into the data grid, first synchronously, and then again asynchronously. Let's go do it. File, New, Project. We want the DevForce 2010 templates, and we're interested in the DevForce WPF application template. There are a bunch of other ones that we could use for other purposes, but this is the one we'll use. And we'll call our application WPF Quickie. Let her rip. And it's constructing the one project. The template provides everything we're going to need for this demo in a single project. Let's add a model. It'll be an entity framework model, so we're going to look for ADO. We'll search for it, and there it is, the ADO entity data model template. And we'll let that bring it up. We will generate from a database, and we will use the Northwind IB, which is kind of like Northwind. That database was installed when you installed DevForce. We'll let it hunt for the schema. Notice while it's doing that it will pluralize and singularize for us, and it will include the foreign key columns in our entities. That's all new in Entity Framework 4, and you know, we could pick any of these tables, but we're going to just build an entity around the customer table. Waiting for it to produce. Notice that DevForce did some code generation for us even before we saw the entity framework designer show up. And if we look in the properties, we click the canvas, and then we look in the properties, we'll see that there's a DevForce code generation section. The DevForce object mapper is integrated right into the entity framework designer, and we're writing our attributes right into the same EDMX, sharing it with entity framework itself. You could go on to elaborate this model here or come back later and do it, but we're done for this demonstration. Notice the IdeaBlade references that were added by the template, but what I really want to draw your attention to is this TT file right here. I had pointed out a second ago some activity from DevForce. That was DevForce generating entities using this T4 template that we've added here, this T4 template that you can customize if you want, to generate our code, which appears in this designer file down here. We'll open it up and scroll down a little bit. There's the customer class that was generated around the customer table in Northwind IB tutorial, and there is the Northwind IB entities, which is a strongly typed version of the DevForce Entity Manager. The Entity Manager is the vehicle for communicating with the back end, and it turns things into entities, and we'll be using that in a moment. While I'm here, it's worth noting that you did not see any Entity Framework generated classes. That's because there aren't any. You don't generate Entity Framework classes anymore. You just generate DevForce classes. Let's turn to the UI now. We'll go to the main window XAML. That's our main view. And we'll switch from XAML to the designer. We're going to put the WPF data grid on our view. If you don't have it, that could be because you didn't install it because it's not part of the core platform. So you can go to Codeplex and get it. The WPF toolkit is what you want, and here's where you can find it. And you'll need that, otherwise the demo won't work. Assuming you've got the WPF toolkit installed, you're ready to go to the data sources window and add a data source. It's going to be an object data source. It's going to be our customer. And oh, goodness. I do this all the time. All we see are the Idea Blade assemblies here. We don't see our assembly, our WPF, the Quickie assembly. That's because we didn't build. So we got to go back and we got to rebuild. Takes a minute here. Oh, it's recharging. Let's go try that again. We'll add a new data source of type object and go look. And yes, our WPF Quickie assembly is here. And if we open it up and drill into the namespace, there's our customer. That's the object we want. So we say click that and finish. And there it is. It appears on the left-hand side with all its properties, which we could mess with. But instead, we're just going to drag customer on here and let it put a data grid on for us. We'll let the Visual Studio Designer reset the layout here to snap it all into the available space. Go over to the Properties window, fire up the Data Grid Designer. Let's move that Customer ID column up to the top. It will change the label on the header to just say ID. Maybe move that company name up too. We don't need this customer ID old column. Get rid of that. We'll get rid of the row version column. We could keep on doing this until we had it just the way we liked it. This, however, is good enough for now. Let's go to the code behind and write some code. That's not where we really should put it, but that's where we're putting it. And with this long line here, let me straighten that out. We're in the Windows loaded handler, and there's this thing where it's finding a resource called customer view source. Now, where did that come from? Well, when we dragged the data grid on here, it automatically created a collection view source for us with that customer view source key name. And we're actually setting up the data context of the grid so that it goes to that resource. So that's what we're actually binding to, the contents of the view source. So there's our key name again. And we're supposed to, as the comment tells us, load that view source with some data. So we might as well do what it tells us to do. And now we're ready for some DevForce. We'll start by creating a manager. Think of that in the same way you would an entity framework data context or context. And we're going to use our strongly typed Northwind IB entities entity manager. I mentioned this earlier, but if we drop back over here, you see, yes, that's what was generated and inherits from our DevForce entity manager class. It's strongly typed so that when we prepare this query here, this query object, query equals manager.customers, we're going to have a customers property that returns an entity query. And it's composable like any link statement, so we'll just put a where clause in here, or we could say all company names that start with, I don't know, C. Except we're not really going to filter. We're going to take all of the customers in the database. But we will add an order by clause to order by company name. Just about anything that you could write in Entity Framework Link, you can write as a query here on the client. And now we're, well, you know, if that query object, it's deferred execution. It doesn't do anything until we call toList on it or something like that. So we do that, and we're going to get the data back, and it's going to go into the source, and let's see if it actually works. So let it build. Pretty soon, the window will show up. It's completely blank because we're out there spinning up Entity Framework and trying to get data, and we're waiting, and boom, the grid arrives and the data arrive at the same time. And if we move some things around a little bit here, we can see more clearly that the companies arrived in alphabetical order as we told them to with our order by clause. Now, what if we had a lot of data to get at the beginning and we didn't want to freeze the UI the whole time? We should be able to execute that same query asynchronously as we have to do in Silverlight. Let's shut that down. And we're going to do something else in this query, in this code behind. We're going to try a different method on the query object. It returns a result that we'll call op because it's operation result. And it's query.execute async. Now the compiler can't see it yet because it's an extension method, so we got to go up and add a using clause, ideablade.entityModel. And now the compiler can see it. And there's the IntelliSense. It's a query async, and it returns an entity query operation result. a strongly typed one. It'll be of type customer. Lots of things we can do, but we're going to hook the completed event, which will be raised when the data come back, and we're going to use a Lambda handler here. So when the data come back, we're going to do pretty much the same thing we were doing before. We're going to fill that customer view source. Of course, we're not going to use the immediate execution of the query anymore. We're going to fish the results out of the args that come into our event handler. So let's give it a go. Now watch. WPF takes a little time to build the window. Then our data grid appears. Now our data arrive asynchronously, just the way we want it. Let's review. We started from scratch and applied the DevForce WPF application template, which gave us a single project to hold everything. We built our conceptual entity model with the Entity Framework version 4 and used the classes DevForce generated from that model for our entire application. We made a data source out of the customer entity and used that to craft a data grid for our main view. Then we went into the view's code behind, where we created a DevForce entity manager, created a customer query from that manager, and invoked it synchronously, pouring the results of the customers fetched from the database into the data grid of our view. Finally, we circled back and did that one more time. This time we did it asynchronously, as you would have to do in Silverlight, and as is often a good idea in regular .NET and WPF. That got us going, but it's extremely simplistic. It's okay for a quick demo. It's fine for throwing together a quick model and viewing it in WPF, but you wouldn't build a real application this way. In fact, it violates many of the best practices we demand of a real application. I mean, we wouldn't mix our model and presentation layers in the same project, and we wouldn't put all of that code in the code behind, and we'd write some automated tests. But now that you've got your feet wet, maybe it's time to take the next steps and learn how to build a real application in a sensible way using DevForce in an architecturally sound manner. You should download DevForce if you haven't already, and try the tutorials that are recommended on the Getting Started page, which you can get to from the Windows menu. You can also go to our website to explore all the online resources and learn the latest about DevForce. Thanks for watching the DevForce WPF Quickie, and welcome to DevForce.